The snow had turned black from the fires, and still they kept coming. Cold smoke and iron smell hang over a field outside of Kursk, as if the air itself could be measured in grit. A Soviet driver clamps his mitts around a freezing steering wheel, breath white inside the cramped compartments of a T-34, and thinks only of forward. Across the same muddy plain, a German tanker wipes his face with a glove, the leather stiff with oil, and worries about a transmission that will not take the torque of the heavier tank he was ordered into. 2 tanks, 2 crews, 1 theater of war. Their machines born from different philosophies, and those philosophies will decide who wakes tomorrow. The Soviet idea was a simple one voiced in factories as much as in field headquarters. Build a tank that can be made by thousands of workers who have not all trained as machinists. Build a tank that can be fixed by a handful of men with a shovel and a grinding stone. Build a tank whose inclined armor and wide tracks win battles through positioning rather than miracles. The T-34 looks almost inevitable when you see it through the snow. Low-slung, a rounded turret like a knuckle. Road wheels wide and forgiving over churned earth. Underneath that shape lie choices that were not glamorous but brutally effective. A suspension that borrowed from an American engineer named Christie. An armor curve that turned incoming shells into fragments. A diesel engine that did not catch fire as readily as gasoline. For crews, the T-34's cabin was noisy, cramped and cold, its periscope small, its radio often absent. But the simplicity meant sisters rolled off assembly lines in staggering numbers, and when the gearbox broke, a field crew could replace it with a crane and a day's work. German tanks started from another sentence entirely. Make it better. Make it precise. Make it lethal at long range. The Tiger I and Panther arrive on the battlefield like engines of command intent. Their guns had range and accuracy that forced opponents to close with their backs literally against the earth. Inside a Panther, the controls are elegant to a point of fragility. Optics are fine-tuned, turret rings machined to tolerances that could not be matched in hastily expanded workshops. A common sight was a German crew replacing a lens with the fastidiousness of clockmakers, while artillery whined overhead. In action, those tanks could stop a Soviet charge at 300 meters, while the Soviets were still tugging their wound-down wagons. But that excellence demanded fuel. The railways struggled to deliver, spare parts that required special shops, and crews trained for months who might be dead within weeks. Each deployment tightened the screw of these philosophies. When a T-34 column rolled through a burnt village, local plumbers, blacksmiths, and farmers might jury-rig a broken final drive and push the machine back into the line by dawn. When a Panther sat with an oil leak, towing it took a prime mover and a crew whose uniforms did not smell of sawdust and vodka, but of the precise discipline of an engine shop, a resource Germany could not always spare. The Soviet model acknowledged attrition as a design parameter. Tanks would be lost, but more would be made. The German model assumed a smaller fleet of high-quality instruments that must be conserved, tended, and used sparingly. There are moments when technical choices become human tragedies. In the summer of 1941, at the edge of Moscow, Soviet crews learned that curved armor would save them from many rounds, but that lack of a turret escape hatch meant that when a shell found its way in, the men inside had nowhere to go. A hidden engineering quirk. The T-34's commander cupola was simple, but the absence of secondary hatches was a fatal economy. One brigade's diary records a sergeant listening to the scratch of cooling metal as he and 2 others waited silently while the tank filled with smoke. The Germans, who favored better internal ergonomics, had fewer such incidents early on, but their own complexity birthed other horrors. At Kursk, a Panther's interleaved road wheels, an engineering flourish to spread weight and improve mobility, jammed with ice and mud. Removing them required workmen to lift each wheel in sequence, a time-eating ritual while Soviet guns sent men aloft. The middle of our story holds an aha that surprises because it reverses expectations. Soviet simplicity was not mere primitiveness. It was a coherent, strategic technology. Where readers expect the simple to be inferior, the truth is harsher and smarter. The T-34's designers understood that the Soviet Union did not have the luxury of perfect logistics. They made a tank that accepted a lower threshold of survivability per vehicle and turned production into an operational weapon. Meanwhile, German engineers chased engineering sovereignty, the best gun, the most precise armor profiles, the most advanced optics. That convergence of priorities with industrial capacity is where the war's grammar changed. Simplicity became a force multiplier when coupled with mass mobilization. Complexity yielded brilliance, but fragility when railheads were smashed and factories bombed. Hidden in the noise of battle are smaller revelations that cut like the cord of a gun. German radio sets were superior and allowed combined arms coordination that stunned many early Soviet units. Yet many Soviet commanders learned to compensate with rigid doctrine and simple signals so that the absence of radio did not always equal chaos. Another little-known fact, some German tanks, engineered to be repaired only in depots, created perverse incentives. Crews would abandon a damaged but repairable vehicle because towing it would expose others. A third gem, Soviet paint choices, a rough, matte, quick-drying coat, reduced glare and made repairs easier, while German paints sometimes took days to cure, slowing hurried refits. These are not mere curiosities, they are the threads that bind design to human endurance. The crescendo comes at Kursk, in July of 1943, a cauldron where philosophy meets physics. Tigers and Panthers roll forward with long-range firepower, operators peering through painstakingly erected sights. The T-34s come in waves, circling, slipping into folds of terrain, refusing to be lured into long-range duels. The ground shudders with shellfire. Men shout over engines that sound like starving beasts. German crews feel a grim satisfaction as an enemy tank slumps under a single round, but for every such kill, 5 Soviet machines reappear from a dust screen as if they were a tide. Logistics phrase. A Panther pinned on a ridge waits for a part that never arrives. Its crew flings open the hatch and walks away before the repair crews can come. A T-34, its turret half gouged out, stutters on because somebody has patched the track with a strip of scrap and a prayer. Where German design sought to dominate in decisive shots, Soviet design sought to endure the grind. By the day's end, the battlefield is littered with both triumphs and failures, but the constant is loss. Of men, of steel, of a million small decisions that add up to victory or exile. The war drags on, and the lesson hardens like cooled metal. A German general will later argue in a bitter memoir that his machines were too good for the war they were given. A Soviet commissar will boast that his machines outlasted the winter. Both statements contain truth, but the final line belongs to the men who crewed them. The Soviet private, who could fix a transmission by moonlight and be back at the gun by dawn. The German mechanic who wept when his Panther would not start, both paid in exhaustion and loss. Design was not merely a technical matter. It determined who lived in a muddy shell and who crawled out. When the smoke finally cleared, fields still held shrapnel, and the factories hummed under new masters. The T-34's silhouette became familiar in Eastern Europe, and the Tiger One's reputation lived on in whispered respect in officers' messes. But the real legacy is more human. The Soviet approach saved land and lives by sheer numbers. The German approach promised surgical victories and sometimes delivered them, but at the cost of logistics and replaced men with machines that could not be replicated when rails were cut or electricity went dark. In the end, the story of Soviet simplicity versus German complexity is a story about people more than metal. Design philosophies shaped not only how a tank fought, but how a crew hoped, repaired, and survived. The takeaway is both brutal and clear. Wars are fought as much with factories and shop floors as with bravery on a ridge, and the machine that best matches its nation's capacity and its soldiers' endurance is the one that will outlast the rest. Decades later, farmers still turn up fragments of armor in their fields and tell stories about grandfathers who fixed engines with a hammer. Those fragments are the punctuation marks of a lesson that echoes across history. That simplicity, when married to purpose and people, can beat complexity every time the rails go silent. If you enjoyed this, tap like and subscribe. It really helps. And drop a quick comment telling us where you're watching from. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world. Your reply helps the video reach more people just like you.